if I'm missing any ladies in the group. So the focus today has been auto industry. So we all talking about the new normal that is going to come in, and the disruption and the emerging business models that we will probably see. So I want to welcome and thank Mr. Nikunj Sanghi for being here and having his insights, knowledge on these topics and more. And of course, we've already, some of us have met Nikunj Sanghi. Again, he is an industry veteran and has been working on the issues with he's chairman of Automotive Skill Development Council, and has been past president of FADA, the Federation of Automobile Dealers Association, qualified lawyer as well, secretary, and I think he has been a big force behind the dealer association and has been a spokesperson for this industry. And I'm sure I thank you, Nikunji, for being here, and I hope you're keeping safe at home in Alwar. I'm sure after a long time that you've got to be in Alwar, and I'm sure ma'am and the Rishabh and everybody would be saying, finally we get to see you more than see you on television or some other place.
So definitely my record of being home.
Nikunji, as you're aware, Tire Rajasthan amongst various sectors also represents manufacturing, logistics, and of course, auto sector. Just a premise on the auto industry. So Indian auto industry, including the auto component industry, the dealerships, the whole ecosystem, or rather in the manufacturing part, if you see the manufacturers as well as the ancillaries, contribute to almost 48 to 50% of the manufacturing GDP, and it contributes a huge chunk of employment, direct as well as indirect jobs. So I think this is the only industry very well also, Ravi bhai also had mentioned it earlier to me, that will have a cascading effect all across the economy. So mostly sectors like being the most important, logistics, electronics.
Sharvik, we are losing your voice. We are losing your voice in between.
Okay.
Can't use.
Okay. Let me probably shift my audio to a different.
Can everybody mute their microphones? I think that will also help.
Absolutely. I'm sorry about this.
Yeah, this is better.
So let me get my video. So I think, yeah, this is
Toyota from Ashok Leyland. So you moved from Ashok Leyland to Toyota.
Well, this is Rajesh Motors. Don't worry. Yeah. So, as I said, so how do you see this industry functioning now in the coming short term and in the long term? How do you see this industry going, Nikunj sir?
So I think immediately it's definitely going to be a huge setback, and I think what we will need to go through is a huge amount of behavioral change. First within ourselves, and our interaction with our OEMs, and finally, of course, our interaction with the customers. And I think the biggest challenge is going to be our interaction with customers, because I think immediately what is important is social distancing. And even if you train yourself and your team to be conscious to the importance of social distancing, I'm not very sure if the customer is going to be very disciplined, and specifically in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So For example, you can't have people walking into your showroom. You'll probably even sales calls you'll need to do by appointment. Your service calls you'll need to do by appointment only, because if the number of people in the showroom has to be restricted, if the number of people you are dealing with at the same time needs to be restricted, then I think it's going to be a huge paradigm shift on how we operate our dealerships. So I think we will need to start communicating with our customer immediately that it's not going to be the same. It'll have to be different. And even if you are buying a car and we are interested in selling a car to you, we will have to get into things like meeting only by appointment and not pure walk-in. I think we will also need to see that there is a huge digital shift where most of our interaction with the customer happens digitally and not physically. And I think the customer comes in finally only after closure of deal to take his vehicle to even the finance formalities will probably need to be completed online. And I think most finance companies, most NBFCs are getting geared to do a complete online thing and not a physical thing. So I think it's a huge paradigm shift, and it's going to take some time for us to accept it and for our customer to accept it.
So not only the customer, so how do you see the OEMs working on it, and how do you see them, gearing up the channel to, support this shift that we're talking about?
So I guess it's something like what we have been going to a grocery store. I think, have you ever experienced social distancing in a grocery store? And now that's become a norm. So I think this behavioral change that will need to come into the customer, and I think Piyush also wants to know what happens to test drives. And I think I have been discussing with a number of manufacturers that test drives is going to be a challenge because first of all, the customer will not be very comfortable. He will not be very sure that the vehicle that you are sending to him has been sanitized before it went to him, that it's not come from some other test drive without sanitization. Two, you are not very sure whether your customer is sanitized, and you will definitely not want to be responsible for seeing that the virus gets transmitted because of the test drive, because of your sales executive, or because of the vehicle that you sent. So I think test drives is going to be a huge, huge challenge. So obviously the number of test drives is going to drastically reduce, And it's not going to be easy giving test drive, at least in the next 1 quarter or 2 quarters.
Okay, now, friends, I would just say that we will go through this. I think we are covering a lot of questions, and some questions that would be left, I would request you to post it on the chat, and we will take it one by one after we do this interaction with Sanghi. So, Nikunj, if we go to the next discussion on this, is that just coming back to the industry, there was a huge discussion on the scrappage policy that we were expecting. So, our favorite minister, Mr. Gadkari, was, I'm saying we've not seen him much in the news nowadays, but he was always very bullish on taking this forward. And what is the government and OEMs or the industry bodies doing to see how we can, get this rolled out as soon as possible?
So I think there are a number of asks which the industry has made, whether it is ECMA, SIAM, or FADA. And fortunately for at this time, all three have come together, and I think the entire representation to the industry has gone jointly from SIAM, ECMA, and FADA. So a couple of things that we have asked for, and so one is short term, and which is to do with support for the dealerships and support for the OEMs, because dealerships operate on an extremely thin margin and their fixed costs are extremely high. So, and what we have realized in these past 4 or 5 weeks is that we are on an extremely slippery ground. We have a very brittle and very fragile business model. and most dealerships who are not comfortable in terms of their capital are already facing the heat. As it is, we have been going through a very poor 18-month period preceding the lockdown. So I think it's a challenge, and unless both the OEMs and the government comes in to fulfill our immediate cash needs, which are to do with our fixed expenses, and as most of you would know, our fixed expenses are about 85% of our total expense, and it constitutes basically 3 or 4 heads. The biggest being manpower, the second being cost of capital or the interest on our inventories and debtors. The third is rentals, and a lot of dealerships these days are operating out of rented premises and not owned premises. And finally, electricity, because electricity continues to be our commercial connections, and we will keep getting a minimum bill charge irrespective of the usage. And just putting all these 4 things together, I think 75% of the dealerships are not in a position to pay off even their April liability. So I think that's one request that we have made to both the OEMs and the government, and I think probably it will be shared between the two, between the
So
OEMs
no,
and
my understanding. Okay, of course that is an important factor, and I think I'll be also trying to cover that in my next question. But on the scrappage, so we were talking about. You agree that this will certainly boost cars and vehicle sales in this period, and do you what has the industry body done in terms of, we've been hearing the draft, if you see the draft policy which was shared earlier, it had 20 years. So a lot of people in the industry are saying that it should be reduced to 15. The government was expecting some concessions from the manufacturers, but the manufacturers were not ready because they have just migrated from BS4 to BS6, and they were also having challenges in recovering their costs. And last 18 months, as you rightly said, the industry has suffered. So there was a talk that was going that and GST rebate to be given against such exchange on older vehicles. So what we wanted to understand was, is there something on those grounds being given to the government? And I was on a call with...
So I think that is again one of our asks. So it is definitely one of our asks. Scrappage policy is one of our asks, but I think preliminary discussions, what we feel is that because of very limited fiscal space that the government would have as of now, scrappage policy probably will take some time before it is announced, because of the kind of investment or the kind of money that the government will need to pour into the scrappage policy. And OEMs definitely are in no mood. They were never in a mood to pour in anything, and now additionally so, I don't think they'll be in a position to contribute to the scrappage policy. But yes, scrappage policy is absolutely on the top of our agenda, and specifically for commercial vehicles, because commercial vehicles in the last 18 months have suffered the most. In the last 3 months, we have seen production cuts of as high as 80 to 90%, and this started immediately post the festival season. So I think scrappage policy is a big must. But I think more than that, what we have asked for is first to make loans easier, push all auto loans to priority sector advancing, so that the government, for it becomes easier for the banks to give loans. They have targets to meet, and as soon as it comes into priority sector, there is a push both from NBFCs and from banks. So that's one ask that we have done. Second ask that we have done is that things like CIBIL and NPAs will need to take a backseat, because obviously every possible customer will have a CIBIL default. And if CIBIL becomes the first in the credit screen to even start processing a loan application, then most 80% of our customers will get disqualified in for getting loans. So I think we have asked the Reserve Bank and the IBA both to put things like CIBIL and NPAs on the back burner when considering new application. Third, that we have asked both, the government and the banks, is to bring down the interest rates on auto loans. And drastically, what we have asked for is a 3% cut on the IRR, and which is huge, and which obviously met with a lot of resistance when we put it on paper. And finally, we have asked for a GST reduction that in order to spur demand, as it is, BS6 has made our vehicles more expensive. And if we have to spur demand, then probably even if it is, so what we have said is that it could be a temporary relief. Let the GST cut be there for 6 months or 1 year, and then you can bring it back to wherever you want to. But in order to spur demand, you will need to go in for a GST cut. So these are some of the things that the industry has put together. And of course, then there are other things which probably
So,
Nikunj,
I would, we will cover, I'm sorry, the last thing that we go to, we are covering this in the further questions also. I think Ravi Bhai has a point to make here. Before I get him on, one more question I wanted to ask you. You're closely connected with Mahindras, and eventually this scrappage policy has to come in. And I think Mahindra Group had taken a lead in creating scrapping centers in India. So since we are all entrepreneurs here, do you see this could be a new industry where entrepreneurs should look into, and could be a possibility of investing and growing this industry to grow in the coming future?
So not in the near future, Sharvik, but yes, it is definitely the future, and it's got a huge scope because irrespective of which corporate which comes into the scrappage industry, the mechanism of scrapping a vehicle, the making of collection centers, the initial segregation of the scrap, I think it will be franchising model which will happen. And finally, there will be the mother scrappage centers, which Mahindras and even Maruti, and very recently even Toyota has expressed interest in setting up those scrappage centers. So it is going to be a very, very big industry. And but I don't think in the near future, not in the span of the next 12 or 18 months, I don't see it coming through.
Okay. Ravi Bhai, you had a point to make.
Yeah, so we had done a homework last week regarding the fixed cost analysis for the various industries. And surprisingly, the highest, riskiest entity or the business came was automobile dealership. I think you are also trying to show a slide made by ICRA rating agency. And if you see that particular slide, in that slide, the automobile dealership falls into a red zone, wherein the automobile industry and the OEM, or auto components, they fall into a yellow zone. So the matrix is basically we take four costs for fixed costs for automobile dealership. So if you see the screen, the auto dealership comes on the red hand side, on the right hand side, whereas automobile and auto components come into a yellow sector, which is, so basically maybe the short term might be bad for them, but the medium to long term should be good. But automobile dealership per se is in a bad shape, because out of that four matrix of a fixed cost, manpower, interest, lease rentals, and EMI payments, So all of them, all the four of them, so of course power is not a big, electricity is not a very big cost for the automobile dealership. And I raised an issue with a proposal with Sharvik last week, and the idea is, as you mentioned, now people would not be going out to buy a car and feel a car. Why do we want to have a dealership which is a very small area, very big area with 10,000 square feet for display of the cars? Number one. Number two, why can't the rental model change from a fixed rental to a revenue sharing model, as all the retail has moved in the country, especially the anchor and the high street retail in the country? So those are two important points. If the industry, the automobile dealership industry, has to survive, out of those 4 points, they have to at least control one or two of the cost. So basically, the rent is one of the important things to be controlled. That's number one. Secondly, all these parameters of reducing the rate of interest and the surveillance, all those things, these are all our supply side things. I don't think so this will create a demand per se from the buyer. I'm talking about the consumer perspective, not of course on the commercial part. What is that the consumer demand has to be, jerked up, because if the passenger vehicle demand doesn't come up, and which can come from aspirational need or actual need, so maybe the scrappage could create a need. Otherwise, how and why would a person buy a car? just because the banks get it for cheaper loan and usko PSL mil raha hai, तो doesn't make sense कि I go and buy a car. I mean, so those are two different things. So what is the demand side creation? Otherwise, it's not the automobile industry, all the glass industry, plastic, paint, steel. Imagine the car. See, India pre-1982 was a textile-based country. And then came Maruti. Maruti changed the entire manufacturing intelligence horizon of the country. All these Japanese collaborations which came into NCR, they are the guys who have taught the best practice of all the industries. So until unless we rekindle the entire industry of automobile, कुछ भी करना पड़े government को, अगर बैग बोरो स्टील कुछ भी तरीके से automobile industry को नहीं बचाया ना, तो इसका cascading effect will be very bad. So what is that thing which the government should do? Finance is the second one.
So I think I'll answer you in two portions. First, I'll talk to you about the fixed cost of dealerships and dealerships being. So I think I started my discussion by saying that the dealership model today is the most fragile and the most brittle business model. And I'm not surprised it's come in a red zone. In fact, if there was a maroon zone, it should have come in that maroon zone and not just the red zone. The second thing is that unfortunately for us, and I'm talking of pre-COVID days, a lot of our expenses are not within our control. Most of the expenses that we incur have been mandated. So there is a silver lining about everything. So I think there is a silver lining about the present pandemic which has happened globally. And suddenly the manufacturers are listening. The manufacturers are themselves coming forward to talk about how fixed costs could be reduced. I don't know how many of you were there on the webinar with Dr. Pawan Goenka on ET Auto. The first thing that we did when we reached out to SIAM was say that our fixed cost should go down by a minimum of 20%, if not more. The second thing that I think there was a huge agreement, and what probably you did not talk about in our fixed cost was the interest that we pay on our inventories. And we have absolutely astronomical inventories. Manufacturers, because of the market share was being calculated based on wholesale, used to push inventories like nobody's business. Suddenly the manufacturers are talking about 10 days inventory, 2 weeks inventory, or even a week's inventory. And I think that will contribute a lot in terms of making this business model viable. And finally, of course, if I am saying we spend 85% on fixed cost, out of that 40 rupees is spent only on manpower. And the biggest problem with our manpower was that our efficiencies and productivities were mandated. So which means I couldn't have a salesman who would sell 10 cars. The manufacturer would say for every 4 cars that you sell, you need a salesman. And for every 4 salesmen, you need a team leader. So even the hierarchy was specified. And the non-productive manpower in a dealership structure was far, far higher than the productive manpower. I think suddenly the manufacturers are talking of productivity, efficiency, and bringing down the manpower drastically. So I think if these things do happen, and they will have to happen because I don't think manufacturers have a choice, the business model of dealerships will change. Finally, coming to the large infrastructure that you talked about, and you're absolutely bang on. Large infrastructures will not survive. There is no way we can afford to, and we will not require large infrastructure because suddenly the business model is changing. The customer will not be coming to the showroom. 90% of the transaction will happen online, will happen digitally. So we don't need large showrooms. We don't need large warehouses. They'll all have to just go. And we will need to drastically reduce our cost on infrastructure also. And I think we will see this happening within the next 6 or 12 months. It's not a very long time that I'm talking about. And I think once we take care of our fixed costs, then the business model, I will say, and finally, of course, what we have told the manufacturers is that we want a fixed 7% dealer margin on our selling price, not even. And no consumer schemes, no customer discounts should become a part of that 7%. And what I'm surprised at, the manufacturers are actually listening to it. Manufacturers are talking about it. There are some manufacturers who are already giving 7%, and there are some who are saying that we are even thinking of going beyond 7%. Globally, if you look at the US, dealer margins are anywhere from 10 to 12%. But then, of course, the entire marketing budget goes out of the dealer margin, unlike what happens in India. So I think that's about the distribution model. Coming to the demand side, you're right. Lowering interest rates into priority sector will not make a huge difference on demand. But what will make a huge difference in demand is that in order to spur consumption, the government definitely is planning to push in a lot of money in the hands of the consumer. And this is absolutely at the bottom of the pyramid. So they might not be our buyers, but when these people spend, the industry spurs. And when the industry spurs, there is this positive impact on demand which happens. And finally, of course, social distancing probably will come as a blessing in disguise. I think Sharvik has a few questions on shared mobility and how shared mobility will go, how mass transportation is going to get impacted because of the COVID-19. And I think those are all the things that are going to make a huge impact on the demand side. We are already seeing that at the entry level, both in two-wheelers and small cars, there is going to be a huge growth in demand when you're not able to use public transport, when shared mobility will no longer be an option, at least in the short term, at least for the next 6 months, 1 year. I don't think anybody is looking at shared mobility or mass transport. I don't know
so just to coming back on the as we said, and I would like to put on record here, most of our dealerships, if we look at dealerships, I think almost 65% of our cost is manpower cost, and as you rightly said, the other is finance. But on the manpower, so how do you see? I'm saying there has been a lot of discussions on the legality of what the government is asking us. We cannot retrench manpower. We cannot reduce costs. So I'm sure FADA also has written, and a lot of other industries have written, and there have been various legal advices that have come to most of us. Where do you see this happening? And eventually, do you see that we will be able to sustain this cost of manpower, or do you see that eventually the legality of us reducing the cost in terms of reducing their salary packages? And I'm sure most of the dealerships are discussing
Sharvik, this Ministry of Home Affairs on retrenchment and not reducing salaries is a temporary measure, and it has been done under the National Disaster Management Act. This is not a permanent measure. I don't know whether you heard the interview of Mr. Rajiv Bajaj, where he says that he is going to reduce salaries of his entire manpower starting 15th of April. And I had immediately written back to CNBC, because CNBC did that interview first, on will it be legal for Bajaj to reduce manpower costs when we are told by the government that no entity can reduce manpower costs. Of course, it took 2 days for them to respond. But finally, Mr. Rajiv Bajaj personally responded to that query, and he said that we have got into an agreement with our labor union. And our labor union has agreed to a reduction of salaries. So I guess if reduction of salaries happens by mutual agreement between your employees and the owners of the dealership, because it's a contractual relationship that you have. So if by mutual agreement you are able to bring down the costs, and if you already start discussion with your manpower, I think most manpower agrees that for the survival of this business, they will need to look at pay cuts. So if you talk in terms of strict legality under this notification, you can neither reduce salaries nor retrench manpower. But this is a short-term measure. And I think once the National Disaster Management Act is removed and normalcy comes back, then you are free to reduce your manpower, you are free to give salary cuts. I think that happens globally, that happens even in India, and even dealerships will be able to do it. But yes, as a short-term measure, I don't think you have that option.
Okay, I get that. So on the finance part that you were saying, absolutely, I think you were spot on when you said that there are various things that have been done, and liquidity is going to be a thing. But with traditionally, auto loans have been an easy loan for an easy asset for financiers to finance. Do you think that this stimulus would help? And what about various different models that should come in, which we were otherwise also talking to be coming in the near future? You think that these need to be fast tracked, like a leasing model, buyback models? So how do you see that happening? Long term rentals, like Hertz and Sixt, how they do it. So how do you see that coming in, and where do you see the industry going in that direction?
I think when it comes to loaning, it's not going to be easy, Sharvik. Even if it is pushed into priority sector, I don't think it's going to be easy in the short term. When we are talking to banks and financial institutions, they are extremely, extremely worried about their present recoveries. Their recoveries have come to zero. With the moratorium, moratorium is on payment, and they feel that if this moratorium is actually given, the customers will never be able to ever repay the loans. So they are scared, and they'll be extremely cautious before they reopen the financing channel. And it's not going to be easy getting finance from both NBFCs and banks in the short term. I think once the banks and the financial institutions are sure about the ability to repay, the income level of the people they are going to loan to, only then will they come forward to give advances. So it's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge at least for this financial year, if not more. In spite of what all, it's money which they would definitely want back, and they are not going to accept bad debts in this situation. And therefore, I think further on, while we discuss, we are seeing that this year is going to definitely take a hit in terms of degrowth of the entire industry.
Okay, so on the finance front, you also said that at dealerships the interest costs are very high. I would say this even for the channel partners. I'm say the ancillaries or the ACMA part of the industry. Are you seeing that OEMs or the manufacturers are doing something to support? When you said the ability to repay, so these are at least organized sectors. So is there any support to the channel that the OEMs are looking at, and are they at least talking in terms of reduction of interest rates? For example, tomorrow I restart our commercial vehicle business, or it's more of a B2B business, and I'm already 2 months without business. My recoveries have been zero. I will need to have additional limits to restart business, because my customers are also not going to be paying me back. So is there any support in terms of interest-free loans that probably the OEMs are looking at? Do you think that is being discussed through FADA or ACMA to SIAM?
So it is definitely being Sharvik. In fact, again, our ask and our wish list is huge. I mean, it's really huge. So our ask is that most of the time, the people who don't need the money will be given money. People who really need the money, and people, which means dealerships which are in stress, dealerships which are already over leveraged, they are the ones who will need the maximum support. And that is where both the banks and financial institutions will shy away. So what we have said is that there has to be a clear mandate of an ad hoc increase in working capital limits by at least 20% for a period of 1 year, which should not go through any credit screens. That is done, dealerships will not be able to revive. A lot of dealerships will face closure. So that is our ask, and I'm not saying we are going to get that, and it's not going to be an easy task to achieve that, because ultimately in all our private meetings, both the government and the banks and the financial institutions are sure that we are willing to travel an extra mile, but we definitely want some kind of an assurance that even if it is a delayed payment, we will get our money back. Unfortunately, we have had a lot of dealerships which have closed down not just because of interest costs, but made our business an extremely risky portfolio for most financial institutions.
Okay, got you. Then let's move on to you briefly mentioned about the customer behavior in terms of how the customers are now going to be looking at. So I feel with the spread of the virus and we spoke about shared mobility platforms. You already mentioned that it is going to be something that people are not going to look at. Even the mass movement buses are not going to be plying. Trains, metros, people will be wanting to look at keeping distances. So do you see with this some boost in the immediate future? We spoke yesterday as an industrial friend of mine wanted to start his factory, and he said, I need to give around 60-70 bikes to my workers so that I can have them coming over to our factory easily. So do you see in this coming in? And secondly, Ritesh just mentioned on rural demand. I'm sure we are seeing at least a good crop this year, and the government is focused on ensuring that the rural economy is sustained. Do you see any movement or any growth because of that? And also specifically in the low cost cars and two-wheelers coming in, because two-wheeler has been suffering a lot. And do you see that boost coming in soon?
So I will not say soon, but yes, there is going to be a demand on entry-level two-wheelers and cars both, because shared mobility and mass transport both are going to be looked at with a lot of suspicion. And both, even the employers would want that personal transport is used more than shared mobility transport. But what you will also see in case of big industries is that they will get into having their own transport systems, which means their own buses. And so I see a huge boost in the number of buses for school. Today, a school takes a 52-seater bus and loads 100 children in it. I think that will become a thing of the past. So every school will need to probably go up by almost 4 times in the number of buses that they are using. So these are some of the reasons where we see that there will be a boost of demand, but for normalcy to return, even after removal of the lockdown, will take some, and till the normalcy returns, there will not be a very huge boost in the demand for vehicles, because I think that's one thing which will be on the last of the minds of people.
On a contrary, there is a lot of thing happening on people are now talking about work from home, and a lot of people have realized that working from home is also making a lot of sense. Do you see that this could be a counterproductive, or no? Work from home is just a phase, and I think people would want to come back to their offices and work.
No. So work from home is a reality. Work from home is the new norm, and I think already I think most businesses have experienced that working from home is possible. And my advice even to dealers is that you should start segregating a lot of your dealership functions where you need not have your staff coming to the dealership, and how you can give them digital tools so that they work from home. And these days, to track them online is possible, to get their reports online is possible, for them to work from home is possible. So I think it's going to be the new norm. It's going to be the way businesses will function. So work from home will become a reality, and it's not a passing phase. I think it's more than permanent.
Okay, sorry.
You're muted, Sharvik.
Yeah. I'm unmuted myself. So, so with work from home, you think again, what we see probably a growth in demand through the shared mobility or mass transportation systems. This could also reduce that trend. or people will still need the bike or car to move to the, probably go to the shop, probably go to the market to do some shopping or travel?
So I think so personal mobility will become a necessity. So it's not just about going to office or going to school or going for studies, which is where you need mobility. So personal mobility will become not a choice, will become a necessity. And working from home, there are a lot of things which you cannot work from home. Specifically in our industry, if a car needs to be repaired, it will have to come to the service station. We will need to have mechanics on the floor. So we will need to have people who are in our back office who will do on the entire documentation, who will arrange the delivery, who will manage warehouses. So there are a lot of things in manufacturing. Obviously, you will need people to come to the assembly line and do all the manufacturing activity. So there is some portion of the work which can be shifted to work from home, but not the entire function. So I think a 20-25% reduction in your workforce, which is coming to your office, will definitely happen and will definitely become a norm.
Okay, on the just going further in this, we also touched upon how digital sales will happen and people will want to look at the digital aspect. So how do you see these online portals? Because a lot of us at TAI Jaipur, we are into this space, and we are seeing a lot of I'm saying the car dekhos and the car wales, or even such digital platforms. How do you see this creating the right buzz?
So I think besides all the car dekho, car wale, or even manufacturers, dealers will need to get digitized and digitized far more strongly than either the OEMs or the car portals. Because suddenly geographies, boundaries will vanish when it becomes to a total digital shift to the way we approach the customer. And unless the dealership itself is extremely agile, is extremely nimble, is extremely fast in responding to customer queries, I don't think they'll remain in business. So digital empowerment of your employees, digital ability of your dealership itself will have to go multifold times, not just a percentage growth, but it'll have to go multifold times. You will need to get into digital tools. You will need to enable your team to be digitally active. And so we have been with our team trying to even put them on Twitter, put them on LinkedIn, put them on Instagram, people who have never experienced this. I think in the last 2 days, almost 70 of my manpower have come on a Twitter handle. They've never even heard of what Twitter was, because suddenly even your inquiries Twitter will be a huge marketing tool. So I think those are the kind of tools that we will need to enable our teams to work with. And we will need to be not just dependent on portals or OEMs to become digitally active.
So you think that this part of digitization or these portals we will be depending on more of car dekhos, or the OEMs are also now going to be developing such portals or such platforms for our customers to come and look at it? So
Sharvik, they've already done it. They have done it in the last 1 month. I think almost every OEM is almost ready to launch their online digital websites. So they've already done it. They're not doing it. They're already done it. You'll see a host of them coming in first week of May, and you'll see almost all these websites active.
I'm sure. And I'd like to share, we've got a member in TAI Jaipur, TAI Rajasthan. He's also on this call, has done wonderful things in terms of digital lead generations and digital closures. So that's another discussion. I'm sure we'll have it one day. I'm talking about Ritesh Mamodia. He's done wonderful things. Anyways, let's go to the next point. So while we've already spoken about all this, how do you see in this industry this anti-China narrative coming in, and how do you see it is going to benefit us in India? See,
So it's not an anti-China narrative which is happening, Sharvik. What is going to happen is, I think every manufacturer has realized that being too import dependent is not possible, is not a stable business model. I think globally everybody is looking inwards and India is also looking inwards. What the Indian auto industry realized was that their dependence on China, Korea, Japan, and Europe was almost anywhere from 23 to 28% of the components were being imported from outside the country. And that is the reason why when the lockdown started happening, a lot of manufacturing had to stop. A lot of BS6 models had to stop on the assembly lines because some components were just not coming. And because both Korea, Japan, and China, all three were impacted simultaneously. All the European car manufacturers, so most of the time it was the luxury brands which were coming from France and Germany. I think those are the ones which suffered because the lockdowns there happened much before they happened in India. So I think everybody is looking at manufacturing in India. Everybody is looking at, I think Make in India will now become a bigger reality than what it was in the last 5 years.
So do you see that even we going into BS6 will aid us because now, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. So do you think that us migrating into BS6 will be an added advantage because now we will be able to also serve European and US countries or the developed countries?
So I don't know. I think first what India will need to do is develop its own capability of being able to service its own market. The first challenge is service its own market. Abhi it's dependent totally on imports. So first service its own market, and then yes, India was becoming a global hub for components. I think our component industry grew. It was actually almost exploded because of it becoming a manufacturing hub for reliable quality components. So I definitely see a huge growth coming into that market. But yes, since most countries will now be looking inwards, there is going to be, so I think it's going to be de-globalization according to me what is going to happen because every country is now looking inwards. Suddenly globalization is not a buzzword as it used to be. And I think more and more economies will be protected, will try and protect their own industry, will try and protect employment within their own countries and not source it outside. So I think it's a double whammy. So, but yes, there is a huge opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs to get into components because most manufacturers will now try and get into not dependent specifically on Chinese imports, but buying imports in the manner in which they were, which also mean that transfer of technology is going to be a big thing. So when you get into collaborations, technical collaborations with manufacturers worldwide, you will not just be importing stuff, you will be importing technology, you will be incorporating the import of technology into India, where India can start manufacturing itself.
Okay, so again, probably that's exactly what we just discussed. MSA would be the reason why auto manufacturers and the auto component industry is in yellow and not in red. Probably this opportunity is there to help them at least tide this time. Again, as I said, I'll share this with the team is that so the Toyota Suzuki JV that has happened. So India is going to be a big small car market itself. It has been one of the largest small car market, and we've been hearing a lot of export from India to go to Europe through this JV. So we can see the Glanza that we are using here as a Toyota product, or the same is sold as a Baleno in Suzuki, is going to be going to the countries like UK, France, and other countries where Toyota is looking at a small car. Which could be at a low cost car that can go into those markets. So yes, this is where I feel, and as you rightly said, there is an scope. So that is in positive that that we can see. Now, if I can just shift to a different segment, and we just spoke about the CV industry. Cars, we see personal mobilities and other things, but the industry we are talking about. I was with a specific couple of calls that I've been attending, and they shared about what Niti Aayog has been talking about if this lockdown extends to a point and the industry comes back. So India is slated to be either on a GDP growth of 1% to 1.5% or a negative 9%. So without the industry, how do you see the CV industry getting back into, and what could it be that could help the CV industry to come back to normalcy?
So I think this takes me back to what Ravi asked me about demand. And I think one way of spurring demand would be to get into a huge amount of infrastructure spending. The government has been holding back on infrastructure spending for the last 2 years. And because of basically the fiscal space that it did not have, GST collections did not take up the way they thought they would. And government was getting into a fiscal deficit situation even before the COVID-19 happened. But suddenly now with this happening, and if they have to spur demand, they will need to, the only way to do it is government spending, because private sector spending is going to be small. A lot of capex will be kept on hold till the industry normalizes. So I think there will be a huge amount of spending on infrastructure, whether it is to do with roads, it's to do with ports, it's to do with any kind of infrastructure. It's going to be huge. And if that happens, then surely the CV industry will bounce back.
So the key to CV growth is going to be infra spend. And you
Absolutely.
see that happening. Have you been able to get any news that the government has inclination to do that the moment the lockdown opens?
So government is definitely, I have no inclination because I am not privy to a lot of those meetings, but the informal meetings that we have had with both industry leaders and with the bureaucracy, I think one thing is absolutely clear, that a lot of extraordinary things will need to be done. So today, I don't know if you read a report where they talked about a separate budget to fight the COVID-19 crisis. So I think all of it is leading to a huge amount of deficit financing that will be done. If you heard Geeta Gopinath, she also talked of the lines of borrowing which are available to India because of, fortunately, the credit rating that India has. So a lot of international funds would like to invest into Indian infrastructure. So I think almost every economist globally has said that money will not be a problem, but yes, government will need to get out of FRBM for some time. We'll have to stop thinking about deficit financing for some time, and we'll need to start spending to spur demand.
Great, that's good to hear. Now, just last two questions probably before we try to open it to the audience. So now, how do you finally want to sum up on the industry outlook in terms of the OEM's understanding? How do you see the Q1, Q2 looking at? I'm sure it will answer a lot of other questions also that are there being put in the group. How do you see this coming back, the auto demand to be normalizing or coming back into this? How do you see OEMs are planning? What is how do you see it? You've been interacting with a lot of the senior management there. What are their indications of the channel partners? So how do you see this finally, if you want to sum it up in 2 words?
So short term, it's not going to be good. And by short term, I'm talking of 18 to 24 months. That's what I call short term. In short term, it's not going to be good. It's going to take time for the demand to stabilize. It's going to take time for the paradigm shifts that we are talking about to settle in, because coronavirus is not going anywhere. It's there to be there till a vaccine is developed, and not only developed, it's produced in mass and it's administered. And the normal cycle is 24 to 36 months for a vaccine to settle down. So even if everything happens, it will take 18 to 24 months for the vaccine to be administered to a major part of the population. So coronavirus is there to stay, and it's going to take some time for the entire globe, and this time it's not impacted one country, it is impacted the entire universe. And it's going to take time. So short term, it's not good, but long term, I think the Indian growth story remains good, and partly because we are a domestic consumption-based market, and our consumption will remain high. And in spite of everything, China and India continue. If you see the negative growths that have been predicted by IMF and all other global agencies, India and China continue to be on the top of the list when it comes to growth. Even at 1.9%, it's still growing, while all other economies will be degrowing. So I think long term, I see India as a good destination to do business.
Okay, so considering this, how do you see the channel, as in the dealers as well as the ancillaries? What would you suggest for them to survive this period of whatever 6, 12, 18 months?
So short term, one, cash is going to be the king. I think most business owners will need to pump in their own capital more. Their debt equity ratios will need to improve. Their dependence on debt has to definitely reduce. And of course, they have to bring in efficiencies. They have to cut costs and cut costs dramatically. I think in the short term, conserve cash is going to be the buzzword.
Okay. So before we open, I've got the last question, that is on electric vehicles. I'm saying a lot of people have been, saying that ICE is at the end, and manufacturers like MG, Mahindra, Hyundai, Tata have already got their electric vehicles on. Japanese manufacturers have been still advocating the hybrid platform, and but as a stepping stone towards electric vehicles. Considering that dependence on China on batteries and motors, which of course will continue because lithium-ion is there, and not that India doesn't have the reserves, but today mining and getting this, would it be viable? And how do you see the EV future? EV has to come, I'm sure, but do you think it is coming immediately, or because of COVID, is it going to get a little stretched? ICE is here to stay for another 3-4 years, and then electrics will come. What will happen to the CAFE norms that have been announced? So what are your thoughts on that?
So EV is a definite. I don't think we can wish away EV. EV is the future. EV is a definite. EV will definitely come, but not at the cost of IC engines. I continue to hold that opinion that both are going to stay. And now with oil prices coming down so dramatically, and people are not looking at the oil prices ever going back to their original levels of even $60 a barrel. Owning an IC engine vehicle and cost of operation of an IC engine vehicle is going to be a little more attractive than what it was pre this oil crisis. So I think there is going to be a huge paradigm shift even on the energy front. And temporarily, because of COVID, EV, which would have come faster, will probably go back by a few years before it can come in appreciable numbers. But EV is the future. I mean, there is no doubt about it. EV is the future. It has to come. And I think India has the strength and the developed technology and to be self-sufficient both in power and in manufacturing of batteries. China, suddenly everybody is looking with a lot of skepticism. China, everybody is looking with a lot of suspicion. And I think globally, a lot of flack is going to come on China the way they've handled the COVID-19 virus.
I was on I just for the group, just to share, I was on a webinar with some of the EV captains in the country today. And incidentally, what I would like, understood is, I think the immediate areas where EV is being focused in India is primarily in the two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and the mass transport, that is buses. So I think the first phase would be focusing in FAME 2 is also predominantly focusing on these areas of operations. Another thing that the group shared was that there are various other energy sources that are being looked at. I'm saying lithium ion is not the only thing. So there are Niti Aayog has already found a lot of reserves of lithium in India, but now people are looking at some other sources also, and good breakthroughs have happened in different energy sources. So probably, of course, the dependence on China might or might not be there. There are other energy sources that could probably change the game here. But as the biggest benefit that ICE engines have in their favor is oil prices going down, and with the government having a huge tax and control over or part of the revenue coming through oil, they would not want ICE to probably go immediately out, and at least in some part of mobility they would want to continue doing this, so that they're able to create a kitty for themselves in terms of their budgets. What do you have to say on this, Nikunj?
So you are right. So I think a lot of chemistries are being worked upon. Sodium ion is one, zinc ion is the other one, and I think zinc is what India is concentrating on, because India is the biggest supplier of zinc globally, and those chemistries are in fact far better in terms of even the e-waste which is generated out of batteries. So, and they are at a fairly advanced stage of development, but they are at an advanced stage of development only in R&D. I have been speaking to a lot of people in Mahindra Electric one-to-one personally. So they are extremely gung-ho about all the chemistries which are happening, but they say for these chemistries to become commercially viable and for them to become commercial models will take some time. If lithium took 20 years, these will probably take another 5 or 8 years, but there is going to be a time lag before the other chemistries that globally are being worked upon, I think will take some time. But yes, lithium ion is definitely not the only chemistry which is going to be powering the EVs. There are going to be other chemistries which will come in and come in much, much faster than what we thought they would.
Okay. So let me now open the house for questions. I will go through some of the questions that are there already on the chat. I would request, meanwhile, if anybody has a question, either they can type in or raise their hands so that we can go ahead. So let me start with Ravi Bhaiya had asked about showrooms. I think, do you agree that this fractional rental or, paying rent on a subscription model would work?
Revenue sharing.
Work. So
revenue sharing, yeah.
So let me tell you, discussions have already started. In fact, I was talking to Sanjay Thakkar, and Sanjay Thakkar, like most of you know, 95% of his dealerships operate out of lease premises and rental premises and not out of, in fact, his only owned premise is the one which he owns in Ahmedabad, his first dealership. And I think it's going to shift on revenue sharing model and definitely not a fixed rental. And most owners, most landlords would be willing to get into that kind of negotiation, because the opportunity to lose that business is going to be much bigger than not changing the business model. So yes, I can already see revenue sharing happening in rental model, and fixed rentals will go out of fashion.
Okay, so I think Ravi bhai, that answers your question. And so Puneet Mittal is asking, yeah, Puneet bhai, you want to ask about some manufacturing in auto industry opportunities?
Yeah, so
I think I did say that.
Yeah,
Yeah, Puneet bhai, please go ahead.
Okay, so my question is that actually there are two changes happening recently. One was already happening, that was change from IC to basically EV, where actually now not the mechanical and electrical engineers are required, but more of the electronics and software engineers are required. And that's why actually most of the car, including China, they are doing all their research development mostly in California. So that is one change. And second is that again the sentiments are against China, and I think companies would like to come out of China. So with these two changes, how can India take advantage of this opportunity? Because I think after China, India can be a big hub for manufacturing, and secondly, India has a lot of digital manpower.
So I definitely see, like I said, that Make in India will probably now become a reality, more than it has in the last 5 years. And so it's not just about global. I think even in the Indian players, the other day, Dr. Pawan Goenka was on the webinar with, and he said that I would like that Mahindra's as a brand does not import anything from China. So I think that's the kind of sentiment which is developing. And it's not just about Indian brands. I think globally everybody seems to be saying that China cannot be trusted.
Yeah, we also
And,
heard Japan
so
giving incentives to Japanese companies to invest out of China.
yeah. See, China has been extremely opaque about a lot of their policies. So already a lot of questions are being asked about the number of deaths which were reported. And suddenly they feel that not even 10% of the deaths which actually happened have been reported in the media and to WHO. So I definitely see a huge amount of opportunity, because 100% of, I would say almost 100% of electronics and sensors were being imported from China by every possible brand that was there, not just in automobiles. I think in electricals and electronics and computers, in everything, I think it was China was the source of supply.
So, as ASDC, do you see a lot of skill development happening and a lot of people investing into training of skills? Are you seeing that trend?
So we are. I mean, so I think what we are also doing is that we are now reviewing our entire skill metrics, and we are shifting that skill metrics towards the future skills that are going to be required. I don't know if you have read about it, but we had taken the services of E&Y to identify future skills which will be required for India to get into a competitive position. They have submitted their reports. Their report is under consideration with the government of India. I think once that report comes out, there's going to be a huge shift into the skill matrix that the ASDC is talking about. And it has to do with everything starting from artificial intelligence to machine learning to future skills, which in terms of electronics, in terms of analytics, in terms of data sciences. I think those are the kind of skills which will be required, and those are the things that we will need to start working on.
So you see an opportunity for entrepreneurs here to get into skill centers or training centers here.
So I think a huge opportunity in terms of online learning. I think online learning is the future. So including skilling. So I think a major portion of skilling will be done online. Only the OJT portion or the apprenticeship portion will happen physically, and for which you will not go to.
Okay, Vikram bhai, you have a question, I believe.
It's more of an observation than a question, and I feel that I think it's a good opportunity for Indian manufacturers. I'm talking from the point of view of manufacturers to look at a more global perspective, because in light of the new opportunities which people are saying that will come up because of people not trusting China, so I believe India will need to also align with countries like Vietnam and and Thailand, for example, and maybe even Malaysia and Indonesia, to create some sort of a common market for automotive components and automotive manufacturing. Because rather than competing each other, if we create one common market, I think it can be quite a big powerhouse to feed the automotive sector in the future in terms of products.
So I think Golcha sir, you're absolutely right in your observation, and I think India is working on a number of platforms to with ASEAN countries to develop a common market. Besides, India has some inherent strengths which over even a Vietnam or a Thailand or Hong Kong, which India will definitely exploit. And like I said, long-term India growth story seems to be very positive, very good. But yes, this COVID-19 is a setback, and that setback we'll take in our stride.
Right, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Modani has some questions about
Yeah, Ritesh,
demand generation again.
Sorry, Ritesh, you had some question.
Yes, ये भैया मेरे को ये पूछना था कि like in China we have seen that I've heard and I've seen in an interview also of a Chinese TV that second-hand car market is on boom right now. So what will be the effect in this state or at this times that when I will open up that in that time will second-hand market will be on boom?
So second-hand market will definitely be on the boom. Second-hand market was expected to be on the boom even in spite of COVID-19 because of migration from BS4 to BS6. And because BS6 technology was going to be expensive, was also not just ownership, but also maintenance of BS6 vehicles was going to be a little more tedious than how you maintain your BS4 vehicle. So yes, second-hand market will be definitely a big boost. And now with personal mobility becoming important, a lot of affordability will come in, and therefore second-hand market should be a very good market to operate in.
So just to add to this, do you think that the OEM, dealer and financer, because I feel while you said, earlier that the financiers are worried about a lot of people failing to, pay their installments, and a lot of vehicles might come into repossession, though we are talking of at least NPS not to be declared for at least 180 or 360 18 to some longer period of time. Do you think that this is an opportunity where the dealership along with the OEMs can look at support the financiers in getting these vehicles and using these two-wheeler vehicles, used vehicles, and getting it back into the market with some additional warranties?
Every dealer to get into used car business, and in any case, if you look at all developed countries, then used car business is an integral part of the dealership business model. So I think you will need to become a one-stop shop for a consumer who's looking for mobility. And somewhere you ask that yes, subscription models will work. Yes, subscription models will definitely work. Because people will not want to invest, and they would want to get into a variable model. They'll want to get into options. They would want to be able to opt out of a commitment. So I think subscription models are going to work, and used car market is definitely going to grow.
I'll also, Ritesh, add to here that we have been representing a lot of OEMs. So for example, Toyota has already started planning how we will be able to, we have started with Yaris a 3-year buyback scheme. So we are working on the used market. We are looking at whatever in terms of getting the vehicles, refurbishing them, and also giving them with a limited warranty of a period, year or so. Some OEMs have been doing that, but this probably is in a different way it would look at. And this also a different plan for going into the rural market. You asked a question on the rural market. I think I answered that earlier also. Even Nikunj sir answered that the rural market is going to look a little positive, because as much as we are scared in the urban market on the COVID, the rural market is still a little more immune to that. Your thoughts on that, Nikunj sir?
So I think rural market is definitely going to be the growth driver, and not so much of urban market, because urban market, besides being conscious of the coronavirus, I think because of the paradigm shift in business models, beside the fact that people will be losing jobs, fact that salaries will not be guaranteed, a lot of companies will shift onto variable models of remuneration and not fixed models of remuneration. I think there is more uncertainty in the urban market than in the rural market. So rural is what is going to drive growth of the country.
So while we look at challenges in terms of the new vehicle sales, how do you see current market? I'm say the service industry in terms of workshops and the parts sale. And I think we have a question from Anirudh on how do we see this spare parts market being addressed, and how do you see, at least on a dealer side or on this, there is any digital opportunity, and how the supply chain is going to be managed?
So I think the first thing that you need to understand is that miles traveled per vehicle is going to drastically reduce, because our social behavior is going to change. If work from home becomes the new norm, if not having social gatherings becomes a new norm, if not traveling becomes a new norm, then obviously the average travel distance of the car is going to drastically come down. And because it is going to drastically come down, there is going to be a negative impact on the service income which the dealers look at, because the usage of the car will go down. I think Anirudh also asked about digital apps, spare parts, and so I think there's a huge opportunity. Anirudh, you are probably a little late in asking that question, because there are a number of people who have started working on this extremely aggressively. I mean, I know of at least 10 or 12 startups that I am entering only on spare parts, and how they are trying to optimize dealer inventories in terms of spare parts, because I think the biggest loss that a dealership incurs, and which is hidden, and which unfortunately most owners don't even look at, is the obsolete inventory that they carry, is the dead inventory that they carry. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and digital is the only way forward. But you will need to, so when it comes to digital business and spare parts, you just don't need to be digitally savvy, you don't need to be only data analytic, but you need to understand this business very well. So if in your team you have people who understand spare parts business, and at the same time you're also extremely professional about developing digital applications, then yes, there is a huge amount of scope in this.
I'd like to add here on this the two things. Yes, as Nikunj sir rightly said, if you see most of the vehicles that are run are commercial vehicles or in commercial offices like taxis or for tourism. So we see that in the next at least 18-24 months, you're not seeing much tourist movement. So we see that at least these commercial applications will be going down. So that will impact the workshop sales a lot. Anirudh, on your digital apps, see, I'll give you an example of Ashok Leyland, because again, that's an area where commercial vehicles is where you need maximum parts, and that's a business that grows a lot. Ashok Leyland has two different platforms. One we call it as a Laycart. So Laycart has been contributing to almost 5% of our parts sale, and Laycart is a very robust platform where a lot of our customers are picking their parts, and these parts are getting delivered through various agencies, which also, so you getting the part from the dealer directly on your doorsteps. Similarly, Ashok Leyland also has a platform called Service Mandi, which is an brand agnostic. So it is basically connecting all repair shops, workshops, mechanics, trained mechanics, as well as part shops of particular area where they are rated, which also has set up various costs in terms of what will be the labor rates that will be charge, what is, and also a payment gateway, so that payment assurance is done. So I think that also has been accomplished quite well. So that management is already being done, and I think that, though I don't see that happening, a brand agnostic platform in the car industry, I think that could be a car industry or the two-wheeler industry could be a added opportunity.
No, but the scope is huge because of the huge car park or the vehicle park that we have. The scope is huge. There more players can come in. More players can definitely start talking about their unique advantage. So you could probably specialize in a few brands which are probably the low selling brands and where the availability of parts is the biggest problem. So I think there are various options, and but I see it as a huge opportunity. I mean, I definitely see it as a huge opportunity with a lot of scope, with more players coming in. I mean, it's not, in spite of the fact that there are people and even manufacturers are promoting a lot of these platforms, but manufacturers have limited knowledge of this business. Believe me, I mean, I can be quoted, and I think manufacturers are terrible at their spare parts business.
There's another question that came out was, are we expecting dealership to get consolidated? You see a lot of, there was an article in Economic Times a few days back that another 10-15% of dealerships are going to close shop. Do you see consolidation in terms of dealerships?
So I think there's going to be consolidation both at the manufacturing end and at the dealership end. Yes, there is a huge amount of consolidation that is going to happen because when I am speaking to finance companies and banks, the estimate is that almost 35 to 40% dealerships are under financial stress. And they were in financial stress even before COVID. So post-COVID, quite a few of them might not be able to tide over their financial problems. And if that happens, then we will see. And I think even FADA has gone on record saying that 10% of the dealerships would close today. Mr. Harsh Goenka made a statement where he said 10% of the businesses are going to die because of the COVID crisis. So definitely consolidation will happen, and consolidation will also happen because if there is degrowth of business, and people talked about, there was a report which talked about the numbers going back to 2011-12. If numbers go back to 2011-12, then we are already over dealerized. We have too many dealers handling a very small volume, and therefore viability of dealerships is definitely going to come into question. So the number of dealerships is going to reduce. So there will be more outlets per dealer, but far more lesser dealerships. Internal competition between brands, I think manufacturers will need to be extremely wary about. They cannot afford that their brand competes within its own brand in terms of prices, and which impacts the dealer viability the most. So I can see a lot of consolidation happening in the dealer space.
Puneet had a question for mass transportation systems.
So actually, India has always been behind in manufacturing of mass transportation. Means like air transportation, the aircrafts, then water transportation, like ships and steamer, then rail transportations like metros, railways. And I think mainly because they always have been controlled by the government. So India has any future in manufacturing these kind of transportation?
So I think India is opening up. So not just mass transport. If India is opening up its defense infrastructure in terms of private participation, you already have players who have got into manufacturing of railway coaches. I think India will open up to a lot of manufacturing, including mass transportation. But I think mass transportation will definitely take a backseat for a few years globally, not just in India.
Okay, I think we are coming to the end of our, it's already 7. I think it's, any last questions anybody has? Vikram Bhai, do you have a question to go?
No, I think it's been a wonderful interaction, and thank you so much to Sanghi sir for this very, very enlightening conversation today. Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure. It was a
No, it
pleasure
is.
being with all of you. I loved it.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very much.
and thank you for all to be part of this. And Nikunj uncle, thank you as always, and it has been a great insight and great knowledge sharing that we have had. Thank you.
So
Till
thank you
then,
for having me,
next time.
Sharvik, and wish you all the best and please be safe.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
Thank you.